Got a pay cut before signing a big contract. My boss didn't know that only I could sign that contract. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above my desk as I stared at the email notification blinking on my computer screen. It was from corporate headquarters, confirming what I'd been dreading for weeks. The restructuring memo had finally arrived. My stomach churned as I scanned the document, each word feeling like a punch to the gut. They were implementing across-the-board salary reductions for all senior staff, effective immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me that this came just days before we were set to finalize the biggest contract of my career. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples as the weight of the situation settled over me. This particular contract with Technova Solutions represented not just a significant financial win for our company, but also years of painstaking relationship building and strategic positioning. What made matters infinitely worse was that my boss, Richard, had no idea about the critical detail that only I possessed. The final signatory authority rested solely with me. The client had explicitly requested it during our initial meetings, citing previous successful collaborations where I'd personally overseen their projects. Glancing at my reflection in the darkened window, I could see the fatigue etched into my features. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of late nights, sacrificed weekends, and countless cups of coffee consumed while navigating complex negotiations. Yet here I was, facing a pay cut that felt more like a slap in the face than a business decision. The timing couldn't have been worse, and I knew deep down that Richard's lack of awareness about the contract's unique requirements would only make things more complicated. As I sat there processing the news, my phone buzzed with an incoming message from Sarah, my best friend and confidant. "Still alive," her text read, accompanied by a laughing emoji. I managed a weak smile, appreciating her attempt at levity even as my mind raced through potential scenarios. How would Richard react when he found out? Would he understand the delicate position we were in? More importantly, how could I possibly explain to him that his prized deal hinged entirely on my continued presence? The office around me hummed with its usual mid-morning energy, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, and muffled conversations drifting through cubicle walls. But to me, everything felt muted, like I was watching the world through a foggy window. My thoughts kept circling back to that crucial meeting scheduled for Friday morning, where we were set to put pen to paper on the Technova agreement. The same agreement that now felt precariously balanced between professional success and personal sacrifice. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I debated whether to draft an immediate response to corporate or wait until after speaking with Richard. Experience told me that timing would be everything in this situation. One wrong move could jeopardize not just my position but the entire deal itself. Taking a deep breath, I minimized the email window and opened my calendar, staring blankly at the upcoming week's appointments while trying to formulate a strategy that wouldn't leave me completely vulnerable. Richard's voice boomed through the office intercom system just as I was gathering my materials for our weekly team meeting. "Everyone in the conference room in 5 minutes," he announced, his tone carrying that familiar mix of urgency and barely contained excitement. My heart sank as I realized this impromptu gathering likely meant one thing: he'd caught wind of the corporate memo about the pay cuts. Sure enough, as I entered the conference room moments later, I could see the tension written across his face, his usually impeccable suit jacket slightly askew as he paced near the head of the table. "All right, team," Richard began without preamble, his eyes scanning the room before settling briefly on me. "I've just received some troubling news from corporate. Effective immediately, all senior staff will be taking a 15% pay cut." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in before continuing. "While I understand this is difficult news, I want to assure you that management is committed to weathering these challenging times together." The room fell silent except for the soft rustling of papers as colleagues exchanged worried glances. My palms grew clammy as Richard's gaze lingered on me longer than necessary. "Now, speaking of commitments," he continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge, "we have the Technova contract signing this Friday. This deal represents a quarter of our annual revenue target. Anyone who can't fully commit to making this happen needs to speak up now." The air seemed to thicken as all eyes turned toward me. I felt the blood drain from my face, recognizing the subtle challenge in his statement. For months, I'd been working closely with Technova's executive team, building trust and demonstrating our company's value proposition. Their chief technology officer, Maria Chun, had specifically requested that I maintain lead responsibility for the account, citing my understanding of their technical requirements and ability to navigate complex integration challenges. What Richard didn't know, what I hadn't yet found the right moment to disclose, was that during our initial contract negotiations, Maria had insisted on a clause granting me sole signatory authority. It wasn't ego or favoritism, rather, it stemmed from previous successful projects where my oversight had prevented costly implementation errors. She'd witnessed firsthand how my technical background and industry knowledge could bridge gaps between their engineering team and our solutions architects. As I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, Richard's expression hardened. "You seem particularly affected by this news, Emma. Is there something you'd like to share with the team?" His question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could feel my colleague's attention intensifying. The weight of the secret pressed heavily on my chest as I struggled to find the right words. "Actually, Richard," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, "there's an important detail about the Technova contract that we need to discuss." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as everyone leaned forward in anticipation. Maria Chen specifically requested that I maintain sole authorization for the final contract approval. It's a condition they've built into their legal framework based on our past successful collaborations. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face flushed red as he processed this revelation. "You're telling me that after all this time, after all the resources we've invested in this deal, you're the only one who can sign this contract?" His voice rose with each word, betraying the panic beneath his professional exterior. "Why am I just hearing about this now?" Before I could respond, he slammed his hand on the table. "Unacceptable. We'll just have to renegotiate those terms immediately. There's no way we're putting ourselves in this position." The other team members exchanged nervous glances, clearly sensing the brewing storm. I knew exactly how Technova would react to such a request. They'd walked away from deals for less significant changes in the past. "Richard," I interjected carefully, "renegotiating this point would likely jeopardize the entire agreement." Maria made it clear that their decision to partner with us was contingent upon my continued involvement. They trust my judgment and expertise, especially given the technical complexity of this integration. The words tasted bitter as I spoke them, knowing full well how they might be perceived in light of the recent pay cut announcement. His eyes narrowed as he studied me, the pieces falling into place. "So let me get this straight. You're essentially holding this deal hostage? Using your position to manipulate the situation." The accusation stung, though I understood its source. To someone unfamiliar with the intricate dance of high-stakes negotiations, it might indeed appear that way. But the truth was far more nuanced, a delicate balance of technical expertise, established relationships, and mutual respect that had taken years to cultivate. The tension in the conference room reached a breaking point as Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You know what this looks like, Emma? It looks like gross insubordination. Like you're deliberately undermining company interests for personal gain." His words landed like blows, each syllable resonating through the silent room. My colleague sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply bear witness to the unfolding drama. "That's not true, and you know it," I countered, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I've dedicated countless hours to building this relationship, sacrificing weekends and holidays to ensure every technical detail was perfect. The pay cut doesn't change the reality of the situation. Technova wants me to sign because they trust my ability to deliver on our promises." My hands gripped the edge of the table as I struggled to maintain composure. Richard's face contorted with barely contained fury. "Don't try to paint yourself as some kind of martyr. You knew about this clause and deliberately withheld information. That's not just poor communication, that's sabotage. And now you expect me to believe that you're still fully committed to seeing this deal through." He paced back and forth, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor like a metronome counting off seconds of impending doom. The irony of his accusations wasn't lost on me. Here I was, fighting to preserve a contract that would secure millions in revenue for the company, and somehow I was being cast as the villain. "Richard, think about what you're saying. Do you really believe I would jeopardize everything we've worked for? This isn't about me, it's about maintaining the integrity of our agreements and respecting the trust Technova has placed in us." My voice cracked on the last word, betraying the emotional toll of the confrontation. He stopped pacing and fixed me with a cold stare. "Integrity? Trust? Those are rich words coming from someone who's been sitting on critical information while collecting a paycheck. Maybe if you'd been upfront about this earlier, we could have found a solution that didn't put all our eggs in one basket." His words sliced through the room, finding their mark with surgical precision. The other team members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding eye contact while others looked between us with growing concern. I could practically hear their collective thoughts, wondering whether they should speak up, whether siding with either of us would affect their own positions. The solidarity we'd built over months of preparation for this deal was rapidly crumbling under the weight of Richard's accusations. "You're making a huge mistake," I said quietly, the fight draining from my body as I realized the depth of his misunderstanding. "This isn't about power plays or personal agendas. It's about honoring the professional relationships we've worked so hard to establish. Technova trusts me because I've proven myself time and again. Renegotiating this clause now would be like burning that trust to the ground." Richard's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Trust? Let me tell you something about trust. It works both ways. And right now, I'm finding it very hard to trust someone who's been playing games with company interests." He leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. "Consider this your formal warning. Either you fall in line and find a way to make this work without holding the company hostage, or we'll have to reconsider your position here entirely." The room seemed to shrink as his words hung in the air, heavy with implications neither of us wanted to acknowledge. My mind raced through possible responses, each one seeming inadequate in the face of his unwavering conviction. The support network I'd thought I'd built within the team suddenly felt dangerously fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter whatever remained of my professional standing. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, the conference room door burst open, and Maria Chen herself strode in, flanked by 2 members of her executive team. Her presence was electric, commanding immediate attention as she surveyed the tense scene before her. "Richard," she began, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority, "I hope you don't mind me dropping in unannounced. I was in the building meeting with another vendor and thought I'd check in on our preparations." The sudden appearance of Technova's CTO sent shockwaves through the room. Richard's face transformed from anger to forced diplomacy in an instant, while my colleagues scrambled to compose themselves. Maria's sharp eyes took in the strained atmosphere, lingering momentarily on my pale face before turning to Richard. "Is everything all right? You all look like you're in the middle of quite an intense discussion." Richard cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Maria, what a pleasant surprise. Everything's fine, just standard pre-contract jitters." His practiced smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he gestured toward the empty seats at the table. "Please join us. We were just going over some final details regarding Friday's signing." Maria ignored the offered seats, instead walking directly to where I sat. Placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, she addressed the room. "I couldn't help but overhear part of your conversation as I approached. Something about renegotiating certain terms." Her tone was casual, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. "I must say, I'm surprised. Our legal team was very clear about the importance of maintaining our agreed-upon framework, especially regarding signatory authority." The temperature in the room plummeted as Richard's face drained of color. "Well, you see, Maria," he began, his voice noticeably higher than usual, "we've encountered some internal restructuring that requires us to revisit certain operational details. Nothing major, of course, but perhaps we could discuss making some adjustments to accommodate these changes." Maria's expression hardened as she turned to face him. "Richard, do you remember our conversation 3 months ago when we finalized these terms?" She didn't wait for his response. We discussed at length why having Emma as the sole authorized signatory was non-negotiable. "Your team's inability to grasp the technical nuances of our infrastructure nearly cost us millions in our last upgrade cycle. Emma's expertise saved us from disaster then, and that's precisely why we insisted on her direct involvement this time around." Her words landed like hammer strikes, each one driving home the gravity of Richard's misstep. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice rising slightly, "I find it concerning that you weren't aware of these crucial details. As our primary point of contact, you should have been fully informed about the conditions of our partnership." She glanced meaningfully at me before returning her attention to Richard. "Frankly, this raises serious questions about your organization's commitment to transparency and proper communication." The room fell deathly silent as Maria's assessment hung in the air. My colleagues exchanged uneasy glances, while Richard stood frozen, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "Maria, please understand," he stammered, "these are unprecedented circumstances. Corporate has implemented some temporary measures that required immediate attention." She cut him off with a raised hand. Let me be perfectly clear. If there's any attempt to alter the agreed-upon terms of this contract, including the signatory arrangement, I will personally walk away from this deal. And believe me when I say that other vendors are already lining up to take your place." Her eyes swept across the room, daring anyone to challenge her statement. The weight of her declaration settled over us like a physical force. Even Richard seemed to shrink under her unwavering gaze. "Moreover," she added, softening her tone slightly as she turned back to me, "Emma, I want to formally acknowledge the exceptional work you've done throughout this process. Your dedication to understanding our technical requirements and anticipating potential challenges has been invaluable. That's why I personally vouched for your inclusion in this capacity." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as Maria's public validation washed over me. In that moment, I realized the true depth of the professional relationship we'd built, one that transcended mere business transactions. Her intervention wasn't just about protecting a contract, it was about preserving the integrity of our collaboration and respecting the mutual trust we'd established. Richard's shoulders slumped as he realized the extent of his miscalculation. The power dynamics in the room had shifted dramatically in mere minutes, leaving him struggling to find a path forward that wouldn't alienate our most valuable client. Maria's presence had transformed what could have been a private crisis into a public display of corporate accountability, forcing everyone to confront the consequences of their actions. As Maria concluded her remarks, subtly emphasizing her expectations for professionalism and transparency moving forward, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. While her intervention had protected the deal and validated my position, it had also exposed the fundamental flaws in our company's leadership structure. The look of quiet determination on Maria's face suggested she understood exactly what was at stake, not just a multi-million-dollar contract, but the future of how our organizations would conduct business together. The aftermath of Maria's unexpected visit rippled through the office like a seismic wave, leaving behind a landscape altered beyond recognition. Colleagues who had previously maintained careful neutrality now approached me with tentative smiles and whispered words of support. Some shared stories of their own experiences with Richard's management style, while others expressed admiration for how I'd handled the increasingly volatile situation. The solidarity was heartening but bittersweet, forged in the crucible of conflict rather than organic camaraderie. Richard, meanwhile, retreated into his office, emerging only for essential meetings and brief, awkward encounters in the hallway. His attempts at damage control were evident in the way he now directed his assistant to copy me on all correspondence related to the Technova account, and in the sudden abundance of team-building initiatives he proposed during department meetings. Yet beneath the surface-level efforts at reconciliation lay a current of resentment that occasionally broke through in sharp comments during presentations or passive-aggressive emails about proper chain of command. The atmosphere in the office became charged with an almost electrical tension. Conversations about the Technova deal carried an undercurrent of anxiety, as if speaking too loudly might summon the specter of Maria's stern warning. Our IT department received an influx of requests for enhanced security protocols, presumably initiated by Richard himself, while our HR representative began circulating anonymous surveys about workplace satisfaction and communication effectiveness. In the midst of this turmoil, I found myself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, Maria's defense of my position had validated years of hard work and relationship building. The knowledge that Technova valued my expertise enough to risk losing the deal over my continued involvement filled me with a sense of professional pride I hadn't felt in months. Yet this validation came at a steep price, the deterioration of my working relationship with Richard and the realization that my loyalty to the company might have been misplaced. The days leading up to the contract signing became a blur of activity and apprehension. Every email exchange with Technova's team carried extra weight. Each technical specification review felt like walking a tightrope between professional obligation and personal integrity. I found myself triple-checking every detail, not just to ensure accuracy but to prove, to myself as much as anyone else, that my position wasn't merely a matter of leverage but of genuine capability. Meanwhile, rumors about potential organizational changes began circulating through the office grapevine. Some speculated that corporate might intervene to mediate the situation, while others whispered about Richard's tenure being in jeopardy. These speculations created an undercurrent of uncertainty that permeated every interaction, from casual coffee breaks to formal project updates. The once clear lines of authority and responsibility had become smudged, creating a professional environment where every decision felt loaded with unintended consequences. During this period of upheaval, I discovered unexpected allies among my colleagues. Sarah, my closest friend at work, became a constant source of emotional support, often staying late to help me prepare presentation materials or simply to listen when the pressure became overwhelming. Even Tom from accounting, whom I'd barely spoken to before, began stopping by my desk with insights about budget allocations and cost-saving measures that could strengthen our position with Teknova. Perhaps most surprising was the shift in how junior team members interacted with me. Where once they might have hesitated to approach me with questions or ideas, they now sought me out for guidance and mentorship. This newfound role as a de facto leader within the team brought both satisfaction and additional stress, as I found myself balancing their needs with the demands of the looming contract deadline. As Friday's signing date approached, the tension reached a fever pitch. Richard's attempts to insert himself more prominently into the final preparations became increasingly transparent, culminating in a series of last-minute meeting requests that bordered on harassment. Each denial of these requests felt like a small victory, yet also served to deepen the rift between us. The knowledge that I held the key to the company's most significant contract of the year weighed heavily on my conscience, creating sleepless nights spent questioning whether professional integrity was worth the personal cost. Through it all, Maria maintained regular communication, her messages carrying undertones of both support and warning. She understood the delicate position I was in and seemed determined to ensure that neither my company nor I backed down from the principles we'd established. Her confidence in my abilities became a double-edged sword, empowering me to stand firm in my convictions while simultaneously raising the stakes of any potential misstep. The morning of the contract signing dawned gray and overcast, mirroring the mood that had settled over our office suite. I arrived early, finding Richard already present in the conference room, meticulously arranging folders and adjusting the blinds with unusual precision. His tie was perfectly knotted, his suit freshly pressed, every detail screaming of calculated effort to project an image of control and competence. As I set up my laptop and organized the final documents, I couldn't help but notice how his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking. When Maria and her team arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, the transformation in Richard's demeanor was almost comical. Gone was the aggressive manager from days past. In his place stood a model of deferential professionalism, his smile wide and his handshake firm as he welcomed them. Maria acknowledged him politely but quickly turned her attention to me, her eyes conveying a mixture of encouragement and quiet resolve. "Emma, shall we begin with the technical overview?" she suggested, effectively taking control of the agenda despite Richard's obvious attempt to steer the proceedings. As I launched into the presentation, detailing the intricate integration points and customized solutions we developed, I noticed something remarkable happening. My colleagues, who had previously maintained a careful distance during these types of meetings, began contributing with unexpected enthusiasm. Sarah offered insights about user experience enhancements we'd implemented, while Tom highlighted cost-saving measures that had been incorporated without compromising quality. Even junior team members who had observed past presentations chimed in with relevant observations, their voices steady despite the palpable tension in the room. Richard's face grew increasingly pale as the demonstration progressed, his attempts to interject becoming more desperate and less effective. When he tried to claim credit for certain innovations, Maria gently reminded him of the specific dates and circumstances under which these developments had occurred, all of which coincided with periods when he'd been absent from key discussions. The subtle dismantling of his authority was executed with such precision that it left him floundering, grasping at straws of relevance in a conversation that had clearly moved beyond his comprehension. The turning point came during the Q&A session, when Maria posed a particularly complex question about load balancing configurations. Without hesitation, 3 different team members began explaining various aspects of the solution, their explanations seamlessly complementing each other. Richard's attempt to summarize their points ended in confusion, prompting Maria to observe, "It seems your team has developed an impressive level of expertise in this area. Perhaps we should consider establishing more direct communication channels between our technical teams moving forward." The implication was clear. Teknova valued the collective expertise of our team, not just individual leadership. As the meeting progressed, I watched Richard's carefully constructed facade crumble piece by piece. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from corporate headquarters, each vibration seemingly sapping more of his composure. When Maria casually mentioned that several board members had expressed interest in attending the final signing ceremony, his forced smile twitched noticeably. What struck me most profoundly during these hours was how the dynamics of power and influence had shifted not just between Richard and myself, but throughout the entire team. Colleagues who had previously deferred to his authority now demonstrated initiative and ownership over their contributions. The artificial hierarchy that had defined our working relationships for years was dissolving before our eyes, replaced by a merit-based system where expertise and dedication carried more weight than titles or tenure. As we broke for lunch, I found myself in the unusual position of mediator between my team and Richard. Several colleagues approached me with concerns about how to handle certain protocol aspects of the afternoon session, seeking guidance on how to maintain professional courtesy while asserting their technical authority. Others asked for advice on documenting processes and decisions, clearly anticipating potential future conflicts. Through it all, I maintained careful neutrality, focusing on ensuring the day's events proceeded smoothly while acknowledging the broader implications of our evolving professional relationships. The afternoon session brought its own challenges, as Richard attempted to reassert control through increasingly desperate measures. His suggestion that we streamline certain technical demonstrations by skipping detailed explanations was met with unified resistance from the team. Even his most loyal supporters seemed to have abandoned ship, their allegiance shifting toward the collective goal of demonstrating our capabilities to Technova rather than preserving his managerial authority. By the time we reached the final hour of presentations, the transformation was complete. Our team operated like a well-oiled machine, each member contributing their expertise without waiting for permission or seeking approval. Richard sat at the far end of the conference table, his presence reduced to that of a spectator at his own show. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Maria, whose occasional glances in his direction carried equal parts sympathy and disappointment. As we prepared for the ceremonial signing, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically the day had unfolded. What had started as a tense confrontation had evolved into something far more significant, a redefinition of professional relationships and organizational dynamics that extended far beyond the confines of a single contract negotiation. The signatures we were about to affix to those documents represented not just a business agreement, but a new chapter in how our company would operate moving forward. The weight of the pen in my hand felt both substantial and symbolic as I prepared to sign the Technova contract. Across the table, Maria watched with a knowing smile, her presence radiating quiet confidence in the decision she'd helped shape. Richard stood nearby, his face a mask of forced composure as he observed the culmination of events he'd desperately tried to control. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all me, that this defining moment in my career had emerged from what could have been professional ruin. As I glanced around the room, I noticed how my colleagues had arranged themselves, forming an unspoken circle of support. Sarah stood closest, her presence a constant reminder of friendship and solidarity. Tom from accounting nodded encouragingly, while several junior team members exchanged excited glances, their eyes bright with the promise of new opportunities. Even those who had previously kept their distance now seemed to recognize the significance of this moment, not just for me personally, but for the entire team's future trajectory. The pen hovered above the contract, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. This signature represented more than just a business agreement. It symbolized years of perseverance, technical expertise, and relationship building. It validated the countless hours spent deciphering complex technical specifications, the weekend sacrifice to ensure seamless integration plans, and the personal sacrifices made in pursuit of professional excellence. Yet it also marked a crossroads, a point where past achievements intersected with future possibilities. Richard cleared his throat, breaking the spell of concentration. "Shall we proceed?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of desperation masked as formality. His attempt to reclaim control of the moment fell flat, met with Maria's raised eyebrow and a subtle shake of her head. I met his gaze steadily, recognizing the fear and uncertainty lurking beneath his polished exterior. For the first time, I saw him not as an adversary, but as a fellow professional caught in the shifting tides of corporate evolution. Taking a deep breath, I began to lower the pen toward the contract. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, each person present understanding that this moment transcended mere business formalities. My thoughts drifted to the journey that had led me here, the early mornings spent studying technical documentation, the late nights troubleshooting integration challenges, and the countless moments of doubt overcome through sheer determination. Every setback, every obstacle, every moment of frustration had converged to bring me to this precise instant. Yet as the pen touched paper, I realized that this wasn't an ending, but rather a beginning. The signature I was about to affix represented not just a contractual obligation, but a commitment to a new way of operating, one that valued expertise over hierarchy, collaboration over control, and integrity over expediency. The transformation I'd witnessed in my colleagues throughout the day suggested that this change ran deeper than any single contract or corporate restructuring. It signaled a fundamental shift in how we viewed our roles, our relationships, and our responsibilities to each other and to our clients. The pen moved across the page, leaving a trail of ink that would bind our companies together in partnership. With each stroke, I felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on my shoulders, not just for the success of this project, but for the culture of excellence and mutual respect we needed to nurture moving forward. The faces around me reflected varying degrees of hope, anticipation, and determination, each person present contributing to a collective vision of what our organization could become. As I completed the final flourish of my signature, a wave of emotion washed over me, pride tempered by humility, triumph softened by compassion, and certainty balanced by the knowledge that the real work was just beginning. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but for the first time in months, I felt equipped to face them not as an isolated professional, but as part of a community united by shared values and common purpose. The pen clicked shut, and I looked up to find Maria smiling approvingly, her nod of acknowledgement carrying more weight than any formal recognition ever could. Around the table, my colleagues began to relax, their body language shifting from tense anticipation to cautious optimism. Richard stood silently, his expression unreadable but his posture suggesting acceptance of the new reality we'd collectively created. And so, with the contract signed and sealed, we prepared to embark on the next phase of our journey, one that promised to redefine not just our professional relationships, but the very foundation upon which our organization would build its future. As I gathered my materials and prepared to leave the conference room, I couldn't help but wonder how this experience would continue to shape us all in the days and weeks to come.